Welcome to the Unconventional Path, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Stories and Ideas. Hi, I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Hey, Mike, today's guest on the podcast is Jeff Greenfield. He is a serial entrepreneur, and his current company, Provolytics, helps companies by providing them with tools to understand and maximize their marketing spend. You know, gone are the days of buying ads in the yellow pages and the newspaper and your local radio station to advertise your business. Now there are so many avenues for you to reach your potential customers. Sorting through what is working and what is not has really become a very complex problem.
Yeah, Bella, I couldn't agree more with you. Marketing has really changed, and the whole world of digital marketing, it's a little bit foreign to me. I've got some really smart colleagues that I work with here that teach in this space. So I was really excited to learn more and hear kind of from Jeff's side what he does. But I think, again, something that I can recommend for all entrepreneurs is, my listeners that have listened to this podcast in the past know we often talk about the idea of getting a good lawyer and getting a good accountant, right, before you start any business, and this will save you. Well, I'm adding now in 2024 a third thing, like get a good digital marketing consultant to help you kind of figure out your metrics and how you're going to reach the people that you need, because the idea of customer acquisition costs are so important, right, to the health of a business nowadays. And it's such a different game than it was even 10 years ago, I would say, or 15 years ago, that this is super important. So listeners, kind of keep an ear open for why it's important to be on top of the changes in digital marketing. What are the tools available? And again, think about why you need, if not Jeff and his company, somebody like him in your local area, right? There's people that'll help you with this. But yeah, I think you'll learn a lot from Jeff in the next 25 minutes or so.
Great summary, Mike. Let's hop right in. Hi, Jeff. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Bella. Excited to be here.
Great. Hey, let me ask you a question. If you're at a social event, not a work-related social event, but just sort of a social event in the community, and you get introduced to someone that you've never met before, and after that introduction, they say to you, "Oh, very nice to meet you, Jeff. What do you do?" How do you answer that question?
That's a great question to ask, because the business that I'm in is for most people who aren't in e-commerce or business or marketing, it's tough to explain. It's one of these things that's rather difficult to distill. So honestly, what I end up telling people is I'm in software. And that usually ends that conversation. But if I want to go deeper, I'll say, there's an old adage that kind of describes what I do. And that is, half the money I spend in advertising is wasted. The only problem is I don't know which half. And our software tells marketers what's being wasted and then where to take that wasted money and redeploy it, so they can be spending essentially the same amount of money, but get 2 or 3x return. And then when they're lucky enough to have more money, we can tell them precisely where to put it at to improve their return on marketing investment.
Perfect. So, I think these days, compared to 30 years ago, this has gotten infinitely more complex for any business person, whether you're running a small pizzeria, in town, or whether you're running a billion-dollar corporation. How to reach customers, measuring how you reach them, and the effectiveness of your various different campaigns has gotten much more complex because there's so many more paths to the customer these days. There were very few paths to get to a customer 30 years ago. It was a newspaper in the yellow pages fundamentally, and that was it. If you were a bigger company, then there was these magazines, publications, right? The kind that used to get in the mail. So talk a little bit about how this all works these days.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It has gotten much, much more complex. And it's been interesting as it's developed over time, and as brands large and even small have kind of dipped their toe into it and have kind of transformed themselves. You go back to like the mid 2000s, to like around 2005 or so, after the crash, and newspapers and radio station executives, they were saying, can you believe that in 2000 and in 99, they were saying the internet was going to put us out of business? And they were laughing then because, back in like 99, before the big dot-com crash, the internet was going to be this new explosive medium, and it was going to put radio stations and newspapers out of business. And the reality is it did. It just took a lot longer than anyone anticipated. But what happened around 2005, 2006 is that brands started testing this new digital internet stuff, because the stuff they were buying before digital, like you said, like print, which is like newspapers, direct mail, TV and radio, the only evidence that what you were buying was working is seeing that sales would go up. And it was kind of a lagged effect, meaning you would spend money, but you wouldn't get anything except you saw in the newspaper there was an ad. And the advantage with digital is you would buy something, and then at the end of the month, you would get a report that said you got so many clicks. So, and even though now we kind of laugh at that, but that was such a fundamental shift for marketers, because as a marketer, the biggest problem you have is proving that every dollar you're spending is having an impact, even back in the day. And it was very tough back in the day. But when digital came out, it was really simple, because these clicks were closer to an eventual sale, and you could actually prove what was happening. So what's interesting is that we now have 20 plus years of brands that have shifted dollars over to click-based type of advertising. So there's a lot of research that shows kind of what the effectiveness is. But what's happened over time is that in 2005, 2006, it was first display ads like on Yahoo, and these homepage takeovers where they would take over the whole site for the whole day. And then pay-per-click advertising started with Google. And then all of a sudden we had behavioral retargeting, ads that would follow you. You would shop for a pair of shoes, and wherever you would go, you would see that shoes, and till finally you bought it. And then they would still follow you, which was amazing. And then the advent of this user-generated content, which is what led into social media, because social media like Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, those companies don't actually create anything. They just provide a platform where we upload our own stuff, and it's interlaced with advertising. And so now now on top of it, we have the digitization of television, which is connected TV, CTV, radio, which is podcast advertising, billboards, which is digital out of home. So we have all these different places where, as a marketer, I can place my bets. And so it all comes back to that fundamental problem, which is why we went to digital in the first place, which is to, as a marketer, I want to be able to prove that what I'm doing is working. The issue now is that I'm placing so many bets. Each bet that I place has their own proof, but if I sell 1,000 widgets in a day, when I get my reports at the end of the day, and let's say I'm only on 5 different places, it will say I sold 5,000. So for every sale, you're going to have 4 to 5 different mothers or fathers claiming that sale is their child. And that becomes this fundamental attribution problem, which goes to the thing, which is half of the money is wasted. I don't know which half. So obviously, if they're all claiming credit, I'm obviously overspending. The question is, which one? Because they're all saying I'm doing it. And so a lot of marketers feel like they're in restraints, because they're paralyzed, because they don't know what to pull and what to push in order to scale. And that tends to be the issue for most marketers these days.
So if I'm running an existing business, and let's say I have $1 million budget for ads, so what kind of tools can I use to help me sort of sort through this?
Well, the tool that every marketer is utilizing is Google Analytics, which is now, they call it GA4. which is Google Analytics 4. And the problem with Google Analytics is it's like if you were doing your $1 million buy on Facebook, Google, and let's say connected television. No one in their right mind would trust Facebook to measure that campaign because Facebook has a vested interest. Well, so does Google. But Google has done a very good job of starting with all of the original analytics programs in colleges these days. They all are trained on Google Analytics. So most folks who are graduating college as marketers or have taken any analytics, they know Google Analytics inside and out. They feel comfortable with it. And so that's what they use, but it is Google's analytics package, and it has an advantage to any Google related properties. The other big issue is that it only accounts for things on your website, if you will. And in today's world, we have what we call this omni-channel consumer. And this is the thing, is that when we talk about e-commerce and people buying stuff online, habits have changed literally overnight. It used to be a number of years ago, if you were to go search for a product and you live in the US, you would Google it. And now over the last 3 to 4 years, because Amazon bought up all of the keywords for every product they had, we would get in the habit of, we would Google something, we would click on the ad, and we would go into Amazon. It only took 5 or 6 times for every person in the US to do that until they realized, if it's a product, why don't I just go to Amazon direct? And literally overnight, 35, 40% of the search market is now owned by Amazon. So Google Analytics can't measure Amazon. So if you're a brand, you've got Google Analytics over here that's just looking at your website. But for a lot of brands, a majority of their revenue is coming from Amazon, Walmart, Target. And so it gives a little tiny piece of the pie that is hyper-focused on Google's products. So really, what most marketers need is they need a couple of things. They need first to kind of change their perspective. Marketers that have been working in this world of digital for the last 20 years are hyper-focused on buying clicks. They think that the whole process is you invest dollars, you buy clicks, and clicks lead to sales. The reality is the way advertising works is you invest dollars to buy eyeballs. Those eyeballs are media impressions. Those impressions build up, and they build up awareness. And when awareness is built up to a certain enough of a level, people will walk into your store. Now, your store, if it happens to be online, it could be your website, could be your Amazon store, it could be your brick and mortar store, and that's what leads to sales. And so most marketers today, even the omni-channel ones, they have a Google sheet where they're tracking day by day all the money they're spending and how many clicks they're getting. And the first thing they need to do to change their perspective, the first tool is the tools that they're using. They need to add a new column to that Google sheet and add up all of the impressions, all of the media impressions they've had for the last year, because they need to understand the fundamental relationship that when you put impressions to work today, yes, you will have an impact, but typically there's a lag in impact that takes a period of time. It can be days or weeks later until you see that. So that's the first thing, is they need to get that to that fundamental shift. The second thing is they need to have a tool that can look across all of the places where their product, number one, is sold and how they're advertising and marketing. So for example, podcast advertising is growing by leaps and bounds. So are influencers. So is connected television. Those three, and digital out of home, those four are some of the fastest growing marketing investments right now across the world. None of those work in Google Analytics. So you need to have a tool that can take those all in. Now, sophisticated tools like Provalytics does that, but guess what? So does that spreadsheet sitting on the marketer's desktop where they add impressions. You can integrate all of that stuff into there yourself as well too. So tools for Provalytics are primarily for marketers that are spending in excess of 10 or 20 million or more per year. But for the DIY marketer, the one who's only spending, let's say, 500,000 or 250,000 a year, they can do the same thing or something similar by starting with impressions and moving away from clicks.
Right. Right. Excellent. That was really good. So, talk a little bit about Provolytics and sort of what it does and how it separates itself from others who are, trying to go down that same road.
Yeah, this is an interesting road. It's a road that I never thought would be. To me, I was a marketer. So marketers, we get into marketing because we want to be the person who walks in the room when Mountain Dew is in a crisis, sales are down, and I walk in and I say, you need to come up with, here's a logo, an update to a logo or something, and I draw it on the board and I sketch out an idea for a TV commercial. They film it next week and it explodes, and you go home and you cash your $10 million check and you wait for the next crisis. That's what marketers, that's what we are. We're not math people. But what ends up happening is that most marketers, we spend the majority of our time in spreadsheets. Actually, we spend more time in spreadsheets than most of our friends who are accountants, which is ridiculous because we're the creative folks. So Provolytics looks to solve that kind of fundamental math issue. Now, what's interesting is the way we do it is we do it with old school techniques, because the reality is that before all of these privacy concerns, we could collect every little bit of data about a person. When someone would go through and do a conversion event, we could track everything using a combination of unique identifiers and third-party cookies. But now you can't do that. So now we have to pan the camera back and look at a bigger picture. So we use a combination of Bayesian, which has been around since the 1700s, interestingly enough, and a technique out of the University of Chicago called seemingly unrelated regressions from the early 1960s. So these are techniques we could have done 10 years ago. The problem is 10 years ago, for us to analyze a month's worth of clients' data would have probably taken 9 months. But now the computers are so much faster when you think about the chips that are being used with AI and machine learning. So we can use these old school techniques combined with machine learning and some AI, and we can take aggregated data. So this is not user level data. We take daily data that comes straight from the platforms and straight from the clients, like data warehouse. So like total number of sales, not individual level, but total numbers for the day. And we can output very granular recommendations, because this is the problem, is that digital marketers, they don't want to just know, hey, I got a 5% boost for my paid social campaigns. They want to know which campaign, which ad set, which creative, because that's the level that digital marketers live at. So we're able to give them that level of granularity and tell them not only how things did in the past, but also forecast forward and give line item recommendations in order to improve the ROI. So we use old school techniques, similar techniques that were used before digital in the world of marketing mix modeling. So we kind of live in the middle of multi-touch attribution and marketing mix modeling.
Yeah. Yeah. So help me understand. Let's say I have a $15 to $20 million a year business. I sell widgets, to consumers, to consumers. So if I was going to say, hey, I want to sign up for Provolytics, take me through what that process is. What integrations do I need to do, et cetera?
Yeah. So first off, what we would do is that we would get the last 12 months of your marketing data. This is data that's probably living on that Google sheet, but let's assume that you're spending money in Google, Meta, maybe Criteo, maybe some CTV you tested, which you found didn't work for you. That's usually what happens when clients come on board with us. There's things that they did last year or a couple months ago that as a marketer you think should work, but it didn't look like it worked, even though I think it should work. And so we come on board and we get the last 12 months worth of data, and we typically get it where we get daily data at that kind of channel, campaign, ad group level, creative level, and we get how much you spend each day, how many impressions there were, and if there's any clicks, how many clicks. And that typically is someone setting up a report and having it automated and come to us. So it's like a one-time pull where we get the last 12 months worth of data, and then we say it updated to come to us on a regular cadence, whether it's once a week, twice a month, once a month is typical for most of our clients. So that's the marketing data. If there's a website, because when we think about awareness being built, what's the first sign that marketing is working if we have a website? People coming to our website. So we'd also like to get how many visitors are coming to your website each day. So it's like unique sessions per day. That's like a 2-column report out of Google Analytics, which can be easily automated, or if they have Adobe or anything else. So there's the marketing, there's the kind of the engagement, if you will. And then the third thing are the conversions or the KPIs. And that really depends upon what the business wants to measure. If you're selling widgets, it's like, all right, for the last 12 months, we want to know how many orders you had each day and what was the revenue you had each day. Maybe some of the stuff is on subscription. So also let's look at your continuity business as well. Let's say you are being sold an advanced auto parts. Let's say maybe it's something for cars. So let's get your daily sales in advanced auto parts too. And so that would just be 2-column files, the date and how many of each sold. That's it. That data comes in. Our team looks it over to make certain that we understand everything, make sure there's no questions. It then gets put into our API format, is placed into the platform, and within about 36 to 48 hours, that data is pushed back to the client and available on a dashboard. We also make all of our data available as flat files, because what I've found, I've been in this space since 2008. Most people, if you're a marketer, you don't mind logging into a dashboard, okay? That's fine. And you don't mind forcing your vendors to log into this dashboard as well too. The problem is that in order for this to be a big win, so let's say in the scenario you're talking about, we're able to show you how the investment that you made in CTV that didn't work actually works really well. And we show you how you're over-invested in search, which is very typical. So you've got your budget that you're working with, and you start moving money from search over to CTV, and all of a sudden sales start to go up. This is great. This is wonderful. Now you want to have a conversation with your CFO about getting more money because you see there's more scale here. Well, now you run into an issue because the CFO is still looking at Google Analytics and you're looking at something else. So asking the CFO to log into an outside source is just not going to happen. Because they're looking at their internal dashboards all the time. So the way to make this a win for marketers is these files need to be pushed in. The analytics team or the IT team, whoever's in charge of the dashboards, takes this data and makes it internal so that the CMO and the CFO are always looking at the same data set. So we're talking about a new source of truth for the organization. When that happens, that's when as a marketer, you can go in and show finance and you're able to get bigger budgets. When you're asking them to look at something else, but their own reports are based upon something different, it's not going to happen. So that's why we use those flat files. So important.
Got it. So one of the things that I think is happening is we're getting more and more data, and people will take that data, put it into dashboards that are hopefully meaningful in some way. But the bottom line is the person looking at that dashboard still needs to make a decision, still needs to sort of analyze it and figure out what to do. So, we can just get this data paralysis where it's just so much data. It's still all fundamentally an Excel spreadsheet. It's just sort of presented in a different way. So are there tools that sort of help me sort through that and figure out, number one, what are the right metrics? And, if this gauge moves to the left, then I need to do this. Is that a service you guys provide as well?
It is. And that's a great point, because there is so much stuff you can do with numbers in a spreadsheet. And you're 1,000% right. These are flat files. You could create thousands upon thousands of visualizations. And there's some that we like doing, but it may not be useful to the end client. I think the important thing for us is listening to what are the problems that they're looking to solve and looking to understand, and then start getting into kind of where they're sitting and the seat that they're in. And because everyone in an organization, all marketers, you know, the marketer's job is to influence consumers to buy their stuff or to be interested in their service. But at the same time, they also have to influence their team to go along. And so there's all these different levels of influence. So you kind of have to put yourself in their shoes and think about who are the people surrounding them on their team, the folks that they have to manage up to, the folks who are a part of their team that they have to get the same information to, and what visualizations will help them. And that typically comes with the series of conversations. And it's usually not just one conversation. It's a conversation, and then you create a series of visualizations, and then you have an open-ended talk where they're like, this is good, I don't like this, this could be good. Because what you want is you want visualizations where someone says, oh, this is exactly what I want. I want to take a screenshot of this. I can put it in my deck right now for my boss. Because even though we're crunching through a lot of data and we have all of the answers, we're telling them precisely line item where to shift spend. For someone who's a VP of marketing, they have to take all of that data and put it together to like maybe 3 slides if they're lucky to their CMO. And then the CMO has to put all that stuff together, and it has to be on like a half a slide to the CEO. And then all of that gets distilled down to a single bullet point for the board. And so you kind of have to get your head around it. And that's one of the difficult things, because there's so much interesting stuff to look at. But the reality is it pertinent? And is it going to help them do their job? Is it going to decrease their stress? Because remember, part of kind of our mission behind this is marketers are not numbers people. We want to help them be more creative. So is this visualization helping them, or is it hurting them? And sometimes visualizations can actually hurt them. And this is one of the other issues, is that, you know, in our society today, you know, many years ago, a good friend of mine taught me, he says, Jeff, what's the definition of enough? And before I could answer it, he says, the definition of enough is more. And that's the problem, is that especially in advertising technology, we think that the answer is more stuff. And if you've ever played around in Google Analytics, you're like, okay, how many reports are here? This is insane. There's too much. I just need 2 or 3 visualizations to get my point across, because you want to be able to tell stories with this data. And if you can't tell the story, then it's useless.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to know which levers to pull on and push on.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And that's all in there. But if they can't tell the story first as to why they're doing it, what's going to happen, and the proof behind that it's going to happen, if they can't show those easily, then they're not even going to be able to do what the system is telling them to do. So there's these barriers in the way. And sometimes the biggest barrier is the fear, because sometimes the data tells you to do something that may be contradictory. And that's, and my feeling about this is that when we run an analysis for a client and we run our data, if there's not something in there that is a complete shocker, then we didn't really do our job well. Because this is the problem, is that we, as marketers, we tend to think we understand how everything works and we know exactly what we should do. And yet the business still kind of stalls. We oversaturate certain channels, and yet we still can't get more lift going. So there should always be something where someone says, oh, that doesn't make any sense to me. And it's like, that's good, because when you test into something like that and you see it happen, then as a marketer, you just expanded your horizon. And that's one of the other problems that we have as marketers, is that we tend to live inside of our own bubble. And so pushing the boundaries helps that a bit. And data should have surprises, especially in a market where things are constantly moving. There's new channels, there's new shopping habits. There should always be big surprises. I'll give you one big surprise that even shocked me recently. We have a lot of these clients that are these omni-channel. They're in brick and mortar, they have their own website, they're in all these places online, and they're in Amazon. So the question is, and they're advertising in all of them. They're on TV, they're advertising. Most of their advertising is driving people to the website and then all of these places have what we call behavioral retargeting. So if you go to Amazon, it's going to tell you, you'll see ads. And if you click on the ad, it'll tell you to go back to Amazon. If you're on the website, it'll bring you back to the website. If you were on another website like Walmart, it'll take you back to Walmart. So it's doing all of the same thing, but saying, come back and shop here. And what we found is the biggest halo, the thing that is lifting the most is that retargeting. It doesn't matter where you do it at, but as long as you're doing it in that scale, it reminds the consumer, oh yeah, I wanted to buy that. And then they won't click on it, but they'll go back to their place where they have an account at, like a Walmart or an Amazon, and they'll buy there. So that was surprising to me, that retargeting, which is designed to bring someone back to your store, actually is doing its job. It's reminding the consumer to buy, but they're going to buy where they want to buy. They're not going to click on it, which is interesting.
Excellent. So, many of our listeners to this podcast are entrepreneurs, and they're either thinking about starting a business or they have just started a business. If I'm in the process of, starting a business, and let's say I'm going to introduce my product to the marketplace a year from now, 12 months from now, what sort of advice would you give me to help me sort of set up the right tools so I can then, when I launch my product, and even before launch, I can kind of make these measurements and get the data that I need?
I'd say the biggest thing is when you think about a new product and people first get exposed to something, and we were talking about this earlier, people see the product, it's functional, it solves a problem for them, and they're like, is this real? Is this, sometimes people are like, is this too good to be true? And so let's say I'm in Instagram and I see the product. I'm like, huh. So what will they do? They'll go and they'll Google it to check it out, or they'll go to Amazon to check it out to see if it's real. So I think from a foundational standpoint of view, and this goes beyond measurement, is you want to make certain that the story of your product is available not only in the place where you're going to be advertising it out, but everywhere. And so that in the story and the version of the story that you decide upon, and in the beginning, it's a year from now, you don't know what the story is going to be, but it'll be something. You may put it in Google as is one story now, and in Instagram is something else. But whatever you come upon, whatever that the name and everything, you want to make sure that it says the same thing across all of the different places that someone would go, that there's that consistency there. So I think that's kind of a fundamental business thing. If you know a year from now you're going to launch something, you want to lay that groundwork, because that's not something you can turn on overnight, essentially. And you want to have potentially some history there, because that gives people some comfort that they can see that. That's one of the things that we see as a failure a lot in business to business, is someone will hear about a business, they'll look up on LinkedIn, they'll see the description of the business, they'll go to the website, it's something different. They'll go on their Facebook page, something different. And so those little things, it's like, death by 1,000 cuts. Every time you see something that raises your spidey sense a little bit, it turns the consumer off to making that decision. From a measurement perspective, I think the number one thing that folks can do is keep in mind impressions. Keep in mind that anything you do, any place you spend money, or any type of even influencer marketing or Facebook posts, you want to keep track on a daily basis of not the clicks. Those are easy. You've got a platform like Google Analytics to do that, but track the impressions each day. Those are a better monitor of what's going to be coming in the future than clicks actually are. So that's the biggest kind of foundational thing I would recommend is keep in mind impressions. That's number one, because no matter what you do, that will unite all of the different forms of media, whether you're a small business or you grow up to be a massive multi-billion-dollar brand.
Yeah. So tell me what you mean by impression versus clicks.
Yeah. So what I mean by impressions is that if you were to upload a video, let's say, to your Facebook page, and it's the end of the first day, and it says this video has 25 views. That would be 25 impressions. Now, where this gets difficult is, let's say you forget to do it. And now it's 3 months in and that video has 100,000 views. So you can't backtrace that. So it's one of these daily things. You say to yourself, okay, every day at 6 o'clock at night on all of the content that I created, that I put out there, I keep links to them all. I'm going to go to them all and write down what the new number is. And then a spreadsheet will subtract what yesterday's number was. And then you have today's count. So that's impressions. Impressions are how many exposures there were of your user-generated content, or as you start to buy advertising, it's simple because it's in the reports that you get. That's really easy. Where it gets difficult is a year ahead of time is the stuff you put out there yourself.
So in the podcasting world, I use some tools, and they tell me, how many people have watched the video, have watched an episode, but they also give me, so many, what percentage watched it for 5 minutes, and what percentage watched half of it, and what percentage watched the whole thing. So in this notion of, particularly with videos and impressions, sort of how long you're there, right? The duration of your engagement, the duration of that impression is important. Does that kind of information exist also in sort of other spaces?
There's a movement now in the marketing world of looking at essentially attention. How long did someone pay attention? And the initiative where things switched into the digital realm, initially an impression was you got exposed to an ad. And what that meant is either the ad was on your page, or the ad could have been at the bottom of the page and you never saw it. This is in the early days of digital. So they created something called a viewable impression. And the definition of that is that at least 50% of the ad has to be in view for at least a second. That became a time thing. But over time, people started to think, well, if the ad's in view for a second, isn't an ad that's in view for 5 seconds? Isn't that more valuable? Or how about an ad that's in view for a minute? Well, of course, that's more valuable. Where you get into problems with that is, let's say you do research and you find out that consumers who actually watch my ad that the ad is in view for a minute, those are the ones that buy. So I want to buy ads where the ads are in view for a minute. Well, there's only one type of ad that you can do that for, and that's pre-roll on YouTube, where someone has to be forced non-skippable ads. But other than that, there's nothing else that you can buy with that type of viewing. So that becomes the issue, is how do you duplicate this attention type thing? Years ago, I had a discussion when things were moving towards a viewable impression, I had a discussion with the team over at the Financial Times in the UK about they were going to shift how they were selling ads. Instead of selling on an impression basis, they were going to sell based upon time, based upon a segment. So if you were interested in BMW owners, because in order to log into the site, you had to fill out all this information, you could buy a block of, 35 minutes of BMW time, where it would go until every person who was in that segment or so many individuals had seen your ad for 35 minutes, something like that. It never took off because it's very difficult to go out and buy that at scale. It's almost impossible in today's market. But there are measurement companies out there that do look at that. But again, the whole idea behind measurement is to say, hey, this is what happened for reporting purposes, and you have this amount of money available. Here's how to spend it, redistribute it. If you tell someone, go out and find places where you can get X amount of attention, that's a tough purchase these days for marketers who are looking to turn decisions around very quickly.
Yeah. Jeff, I want to start wrapping this up. We've been chatting for a while. So where's the best place for people to go to find out about Provolytics?
I'll go to provolytics.com. I'll also mention, because we did talk a little bit about kind of all the shift that's happened in the marketplace. So what we did is we actually put together a course, an attribution certification course that talks about the past, the present, and the future of measurement. Kind of goes over all of this, because our feeling is that most marketers today, their foundation is broken, if you will, especially the ones that are all hyper focused on clicks. So there's no cost at this. It's about an hour and a half. There's a quiz afterwards, and if you pass it, there's a great certificate to put on your LinkedIn. So that's also available right at provolytics.com. You'll see a link there for the certification course.
Oh, that's super. That's super. I'll make sure that information is in the show notes.
Awesome.
So Jeff, one last question. If people are listening to this, what's your 2 or 3 sort of words of wisdom or advice or lessons learned that you'd like to share with them?
Well, I'm going to say, if it was a couple of years ago, it would all be hyper focused on measurement. But I'm going to say that my lessons learned that I'd like to share with other entrepreneurs is to make sure you take care of yourself. And what I mean by that is, there's a tendency when you're building a business to try to do too much too fast. You may get to where you're going, but you may not live long enough to see the outcome of it. So what I recommend for folks is, make sure you get at least 8 or 9 hours of sleep each night. Make sure the fuel you're putting into your body is healthy. Most of us are sitting most of the day. Get up, move your body, exercise, and keep a journal around. Write down your notes, write down your dreams. I do that. Some of my best ideas and thoughts come from in between sleep and awake. I'd say those are the things that I would like for folks to kind of take away from this to other business owners.
Excellent. Excellent. That's a great way to wrap this up in a wonderful summary that has much broader implications than just measuring clicks and impressions. So thank you so much for sharing that. Jeff, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you today and getting to know you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Wow, really interesting interview, Bela. And when you told me about Jeff, I'm like, ooh, I'm excited. I'm going to learn a lot. I learned more than I even thought I might, which is cool. What were your main takeaways from this?
My big takeaway was this is a great example of where the internet has actually made things much more complicated. The internet has simplified some parts of our lives, has made certain buying things, getting information much easier and simpler. But man, this is one place, i.e. trying to promote your products or services, it's gotten much more complicated. There's so many outlets, from Google ad buys to using influencers. And what are you going to do? What strategically makes the greatest amount of sense? And gone are the days of kind of keeping track of all this in a spreadsheet. You need some tools. You need some strategic thinking to sort of help you run some tests. Now, the great thing about the internet and the great thing about these ways of advertising is you can do A/B test. You can say, I can try this over here, and I can try this over here. And the richness of the internet enables you to collect a lot of data. And you can analyze that data and make a decision to say, hey, I spent $1,000 here. It gave me 3 customers. I spent $1,000 here. It gave me 20 customers. Well, that's pretty easy. So that's the beauty of it. But you need tools to sort of help you get that data, crunch it down into an understandable format that you can look at and draw some conclusions from. What were your sort of thoughts on this one, Mike?
This is, for anybody who knows design thinking, this really brings out to me a connection between validation, right? Validating your ideas and your solutions and saying, hey, will people pay for this, right? And using these digital market tools to go for who is my product or service serving, or what needs are they meeting? That's part one. And then part two is how do I reach them to drive them to my business? And these two things are so important. And the kinds of tools that Jeff was describing are exactly the kind of tools that if you leave it to luck as a small business person and hope that, right, you get reach or you go viral or whatever it is that you do, you're really making a risky bet. And if you can use the tools that are available to you to narrow down your focus and to find the right target markets. And even what I tell my students is sometimes A/B testing is a misnomer now, because it might not be choosing between A and B. It might be using A in certain areas and for certain groups, target groups, and using B in another set of target market, and even C and D, right, coming into play, so that you're customizing your message for different segments, right, or at different times of the day or of the week or of the year. Is we can get so detailed with the web, right? Because it's not like, oh, used to be, yeah, the newspaper comes out once a day, right? And it gets delivered in this geographic area, right? Or the local news is on at 6:30 to 7 p.m., right? It's 24/7, it's worldwide. And these are the types of tools that can help you both validate your ideas, are customers willing to pay, and then getting you to get business driven to you in a consistent way so that you can build the revenue and build the customer base that you can. Because again, longtime listeners will know, we've said it how many times, you're much better off, instead of borrowing money, right, or getting investors, right, in using your own cash flow to fund your growth. And again, if you have the right digital marketing person and tools, right, you can speed up or accelerate this idea of, I can bring in more revenue now so I can invest in my business without borrowing money, without diluting the company through more shareholders. That may be good for some people, absolutely, like we've talked about, but in other cases, you want to do it internally. And these are great tools, I think, for doing that. So I was really excited to hear that somebody's doing that for entrepreneurs, in Jeff's case, and finding a real market for it. I don't know. What do you think?
You know, one of the things that this sort of reminds me of is that as entrepreneurs, you believe in your product. You think it's the best thing out there. So the challenge is for you, from your perspective as an entrepreneur, you say, of course, it's obvious people are going to use my product. Of course they want it. And that's a mindset that you have. That's a good mindset to have because it keeps you focused, but it's also a weakness in sort of your plan, because people are currently doing something to get that job done today. So the story I always used to say, or the question I always used to say in my class is, when Henry Ford came out with the automobile, what was his competition? And people would say, oh, he had no competition, right? We've heard this from entrepreneurs. I have no competition. And well, Henry Ford had no competition. Oh, he had a lot, because no one else made cars. So he actually had a lot of competition. People could walk, they could use a bicycle, right? They could take a train, they could ride a horse. And one of the reasons the Model T, when it came out, was priced where it was, which I think was right around $400, was, you know why, Mike? That's about the cost of keeping a horse for a year. Right? So Henry Ford knew that.
Market-based pricing.
Market-based pricing. So this notion of you most of the times, your product or service, number one, has competition, and number two, people are currently performing that thing that your product or service does using some other method. So you have to get them to change, and getting customers to change is not easy. So you got to first you got to find them. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes not so easy. And then you got to figure out what the right messaging is. And then you have to see if that messaging is working to get them to try it, your product or service. And I think that's the real value of these tools. And the weakness of entrepreneurs is, well, number one, I mean, I've heard that so many times in pitches that entrepreneurs made to myself as a VC. We have no competition. And I was like, all right, pitch over, buddy. Mm-hmm. Everyone's got competition. So I think that's the beauty of this. I learned a lot from my conversation with Jeff. And like you, I think it's now on that list of three: an attorney, an accountant, and someone who sort of really has a deep understanding of digital marketing and can sort of help you through this maze of different ways of doing it.
Love it, Bela. Couldn't say it any better myself. What do you think? Should we wrap this one up?
Sounds good, Mike. Let's give it a wrap.
All right, listeners, thanks for yet another interesting, spending some interesting time with us when we were talking to entrepreneurs and trying to make the world of entrepreneurship better. Hope that you found this episode interesting and thought-provoking, just like we did. And as always, if you have questions about what we've discussed, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike@gmail.com.
Hey, and please hit that follow button on your favorite podcasting app and write us a review. That helps other people find us. And if you know of someone that would be a good guest for the show, send us an email, make an introduction, and we'll think about inviting them to be a guest on the podcast. So signing off from upstate New York. See you all soon.
That's great. And from over here in Münster, Germany, see you next time.